A wedding in a town too small for maps. Cana, in the hill country of Galilee, a place nobody outside its own borders has ever bothered to name. There is music. There is dancing. There is a young man everyone assumes is simply a guest, standing near his mother, watching the celebration the way you watch something you already know is about to end. And then the wine runs out. You have to understand what that meant in that culture. At that moment, before you can understand why what happens next matters at all. A wedding in that world lasted 7 days. Running out of wine on day 2 or 3 was not an inconvenience. It was a public shame the groom's family would carry for years, whispered about at markets, remembered at funerals, the kind of failure a small town never quite forgets. His mother leans in. They have no wine. He turns to her, and what he says next sounds strange to modern ears. "Woman, why does this concern me? My hour has not yet come." Hold that phrase. My hour has not yet come. Remember it. We are going to come back to it at the very end of this video. On a hillside outside Jerusalem, in front of an empty tomb. But not yet. His mother doesn't argue with him. She simply turns to the servant standing nearby and says 5 words that will echo through every miracle we are about to walk through tonight. Do whatever he tells you. There are 6 stone water jars against the wall, the kind used for Jewish purification washing, each one able to hold 20 or 30 gallons. He tells the servants to fill them with water, not wine. Water, to the brim. Then he tells them to draw some out and take it to the man running the feast. The master of the feast tastes it, and he does something you would not expect. He goes and finds the groom, the same groom who is about to be humiliated in front of the entire town, and he pulls him aside, almost accusing him of something backward. "Everyone serves the good wine first," he says, "and the cheap wine after the guests are drunk and can't tell the difference. But you have saved the best wine until now." The best wine. Saved until now. Nobody at that wedding except a handful of servants knew what had actually happened in those 6 stone jars. This is not a story about magic. This is not a story about a party trick to save someone from embarrassment. This is not even primarily a story about wine. This is the first thread in a pattern that runs through the entire life of Jesus. A pattern so consistent, so deliberate, that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The gospel writer John doesn't even call this a miracle. He calls it a times semeion, times a Greek word meaning sign. A sign is not just a display of power. A sign points somewhere. It exists to answer a question. And the question every single sign Jesus performs is quietly answering is the same one. Who is this man, really? Here's what most people miss. They read the miracles of Jesus the way you'd flip through a highlight reel, impressive moment, impressive moment, impressive moment, without ever asking why this one happened here, and that one happened there, and why the order matters at all. Tonight we are walking through them in order. Every single one. From a wedding in Cana to an empty tomb outside Jerusalem. And what you are going to find is not a random string of wonders. You are going to find a case being built, piece by piece, each one heavier than the last, until the final one changes everything. This is not a story about water and wine. This is not a story about crowds and bread. This is not a story about a list of ancient events for a history lesson. This is the story of a pattern hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years, and once you know how to look for it, you will never read these stories the same way again. Let's start at the beginning. Stay with me, because the second sign happens fast, and it happens to someone in agony, 30 miles away, without Jesus ever laying a hand on him. A royal official from Capernaum tracks Jesus down in Cana. His son is dying. Fever has taken hold of the boy so completely that the servants back home are already bracing for the worst. The official begs Jesus to come down to his house before it's too late. Jesus doesn't move. He simply says, "Go. Your son will live." The man believes him on nothing but a sentence and starts the long walk home. The next day, his own servants meet him on the road with the news that the boy is alive and well. When did the fever break? They tell him the exact hour. It is the exact hour Jesus spoke the words in Cana, 30 miles away. Notice what's happening already. The first sign involved his hands, close up, at a party. The second sign involved nothing but his voice, from a distance, over a dying child. Different distance. Same authority. Not long after this, Jesus is walking the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he calls out to 2 fishermen, Simon Peter and his brother, who have been out all night and caught nothing. He tells Simon to push the boat out and let down the nets one more time. Simon is exhausted and skeptical and does it anyway. The nets come up so full of fish that they begin to tear, and Simon has to call a second boat over just to hold the catch, and both boats start sinking under the weight of it. Simon Peter's reaction is not excitement, it's terror. He falls at Jesus' knees and says, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Here's the part nobody tells you. The miracle wasn't the point for Simon. The point was what the miracle revealed about who was standing in his boat. That's the pattern again. The sign is never really about the fish, or the fever, or the wine. It's about the identity standing behind it. From there, the miracles come quickly, almost overwhelming in number, and each one is quietly answering a harder question than the last. In the synagogue at Capernaum, a man possessed by an unclean spirit interrupts Jesus mid-teaching and shrieks, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Jesus commands the spirit to be silent and come out, and it does, throwing the man into convulsions on its way out the door. The crowd is stunned into silence, then into whispering. This man commands unclean spirits, and they obey him. That same day, in Simon Peter's own house, Peter's mother-in-law is burning with fever. Jesus takes her by the hand, and the fever leaves her so completely that she gets up immediately and starts serving the meal. No recovery period, no weakness afterward. Complete, instant, and this detail matters. She gets up and goes straight back to ordinary life. The miracles of Jesus never leave people frozen in wonder. They leave people functioning again. Then a leper comes to him, and you have to understand what leprosy meant in that world. It wasn't only a disease, it was a sentence of complete social death. Lepers had to live outside the town, shout, "Unclean, unclean," if anyone came near, and were forbidden from touching another human being for the rest of their lives, sometimes for decades. This man kneels in front of Jesus and says something remarkable. He doesn't ask, "Can you heal me?" He says, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." He already believes in the power. What he's not sure of is the willingness. And Jesus does something that should stop you cold if you understand the law of that time. He reaches out and he touches him. Before the healing even happens, Jesus touches a man that an entire society has been terrified to touch for years. Then he says, "I am willing, be clean," and the disease is simply gone. Here's what most people miss about that story. The healing is almost secondary to the touch. Anyone could have prayed for the leper from 10 feet away. Only someone who wasn't afraid of being made unclean himself would reach out and touch him first. Not everyone who watches these signs responds with wonder, though. Some respond with suspicion, and that suspicion turns into something colder as the story goes on. 4 men carry their paralyzed friend to a house where Jesus is teaching, and the crowd is so thick they can't get through the door. So they climb up, dig a hole through the roof, and lower the man down on his mat right in front of Jesus. Jesus looks at the paralyzed man and says something nobody in that room expected. Not "be healed." He says, "Son, your sins are forgiven." The religious scholars in the room go rigid. In their minds, only God can forgive sin. For a man to say those words out loud is blasphemy, punishable by death. Jesus, apparently able to hear what they're thinking without them saying a word, asks them directly, which is easier to say, "Your sins are forgiven," or "get up and walk"? Then, so that they will know he has the authority to do both, he tells the paralyzed man to pick up his mat and go home. And the man does, walking, carrying the very mat he was carried in on. This is the moment the stakes start to climb. It's no longer just, can this man heal? It's, does this man think he's God? And that question is never going to go away for the rest of the story. If you've ever carried guilt heavier than any physical pain you've felt, you already understand why Jesus dealt with the man's sin before he dealt with his legs. You know that some kinds of paralysis have nothing to do with muscles at all. That's the part of this story most people skip past on their way to the walking. Don't skip past it. It's the whole reason the story is told this way, and not the other way around. It shows up again almost immediately when Jesus heals a man's withered hand, a hand that has been shriveled and useless for years on the Sabbath, inside a synagogue in front of religious leaders who are watching him closely to see if he'll break their Sabbath laws so they can accuse him. He asks the room a piercing question. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or destroy one? Nobody answers. He heals the hand anyway. And the text tells us something chilling. The religious leaders walk out that same day and start plotting how to kill him. Pay attention to this, because it's easy to miss the pattern here. Every miracle so far has done two things at once. It has helped someone who is suffering, and it has drawn a harder line between the people who see him as a healer and the people who see him as a threat. A Roman centurion, a Gentile, an occupying soldier, someone with no claim at all to Jewish faith, sends word to Jesus that his servant is paralyzed and in terrible pain at home. Jesus offers to come to the house immediately, and the centurion sends back a message that stuns him. Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. I am a man under authority myself, and I understand what it means to give an order and have it obeyed. Jesus turns to the crowd following him and says something that would have shocked every Jewish listener present. I tell you, I have not found faith like this in all of Israel. A foreign soldier, not a rabbi, not a priest, not a single descendant of Abraham sees more clearly than anyone in the religious establishment who Jesus really is. Not long after, in the small town of Nain, Jesus meets a funeral procession coming the other way. A widow, already having lost her husband, is now burying her only son. In that world, a widow with no son had no protector, no income, and often no future. Jesus sees her, and Luke's gospel tells us plainly what happens inside him. He has compassion on her. He walks up to the coffin, touches it, and the men carrying it stop. He speaks directly to the dead young man. Young man, I say to you, arise. And the young man sits up and starts speaking. And Jesus gives him back to his mother. Notice the scale that just changed. Every miracle up to this point has been about healing something broken. This one is about reversing something final. Death itself just responded to his voice in the middle of a public road, in front of an entire funeral procession. The crowd's response tells you they understood exactly what they'd just seen. A great prophet has risen among us, they say. God has visited his people. We're only a fraction of the way through this list. And already the stakes have moved from fever to skin disease to paralysis to public authority over religious law to a Gentile's faith outshining Israel's, to death reversed on an open road. Here's what most people miss when they watch these stories in isolation instead of in order. This is not a random sequence. This is an argument, building, and it gets stranger. Sometime later, Jesus and his disciples are crossing the Sea of Galilee at night when a violent storm rolls in the kind of sudden, ferocious squall that lake is known for. Waves crashing over the sides of the boat, water pouring in. These are experienced fishermen. Some of them have worked this lake their whole lives, and they are convinced they are about to drown. Jesus is asleep in the back of the boat, asleep through all of it. They wake him in a panic. Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die? He stands up, and he speaks not a prayer, not a plea to heaven, but a direct command, the way you'd address something that answers to you. Peace, be still. And the wind stops, completely, instantly. The sea goes flat, glassy, silent, as if it had never been disturbed at all. The disciples are more terrified after the storm stops than they were during it. Who is this? They whisper to each other, that even the wind and the waves obey him? That question is the whole point of this entire video. Who is this? Every miracle we've walked through is another attempt to answer it. They land on the far shore, in Gentile territory, and a man comes running toward them out of the tombs, where he lives a man so violently possessed by demons that chains couldn't hold him anymore, that he had been howling among the graves and cutting himself with stones day and night. When Jesus asks the spirit its name, it answers, "My name is Legion, for we are many," a name borrowed straight from a Roman military unit of thousands of soldiers. This was not one problem. This was an army of them, living inside one broken man. Jesus casts them out into a nearby herd of pigs, and the entire herd rushes down a hillside into the sea and drowns. The man who used to scream among the tombs is found afterward sitting calmly, fully clothed, in his right mind. Here's the part that should stop you. The local townspeople don't celebrate. They beg Jesus to leave. An army of demons obeying his voice frightened them more than the demons themselves ever had. Power that big, standing that close, is not comfortable unless you already trust the character behind it. That's worth remembering the next time this pattern makes you uneasy instead of amazed. The disciples felt exactly the same thing after the storm. Fear of the power is often just the first draft of faith in the person who carries it. The man himself begs to come along with Jesus when he leaves by boat. Jesus tells him no, go home instead, to the very people who used to be afraid of him, and tell them what has been done for him. It's a small detail easy to miss, but notice it. Not every sign in this list ends with someone following Jesus around. Sometimes the sign sends a person back into the ordinary life they were cut off from, carrying the story with them instead of carrying Jesus' bag. Back across the lake, a synagogue leader named Jairus falls at Jesus' feet, begging him to come heal his 12-year-old daughter, who is dying. Jesus starts walking toward the house immediately, but the crowd is so dense that a woman manages to slip in close behind him unnoticed. She has been bleeding continuously for 12 years. Not only is she physically weakened by over a decade of blood loss under the purity laws of her time, that condition made her ritually unclean, unable to worship at the temple, unable to be touched, functionally invisible in her own community for 12 straight years. She doesn't ask him for anything out loud. She simply thinks, if I can just touch the edge of his cloak, that will be enough. She reaches out. She touches it, and immediately, the bleeding stops. Jesus stops walking and asks who touched him. His disciples think the question is almost absurd. There's a crowd pressing in from every side. But he knows something happened. The woman, trembling, comes forward and tells him the whole truth. And he could have simply moved on to Jairus' dying daughter. Instead, he stops in the middle of an emergency and speaks to her by name of relationship rather than shame. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. While he is still speaking, messengers arrive from Jairus' house. The girl has already died. Don't bother the teacher any further, they say. Jesus turns to Jairus and says 4 words that could not have made sense in that moment. Do not fear, only believe. He arrives at the house where professional mourners are already wailing loudly, a sign the child was truly dead, not simply asleep. He tells them the girl is only sleeping, and they laugh at him. He puts them all outside, takes the girl's parents and 3 of his disciples into the room, takes her small hand in his, and speaks 2 Aramaic words that were remembered so precisely by witnesses that Mark's gospel records them in her own native tongue, untranslated, before giving the meaning. Talitha Cumi. Little girl, I say to you, arise. She gets up immediately and walks. And Jesus, in the middle of a miracle that just reversed death itself, tells them to give the girl something to eat. A detail so ordinary, so tender, that it almost undercuts the enormity of what just happened. That's the pattern again. The wonder never eclipses the care. There's one more thing worth holding on to before we move forward. 2 miracles just happened inside the same walk across town. A 12-year sickness and a 12-year-old girl's death, resolved within the same hour on the same road. This is not coincidence stacked on coincidence. This is a pattern, tightening, and now watch what happens next. Because the scale is about to jump again from 1 person to thousands. A crowd of more than 5,000 people has followed Jesus out into a remote place, and it's getting late, and there is no food. His disciples want to send everyone away to buy their own dinner in the nearby villages. Jesus tells them, you give them something to eat. All they can find in the entire crowd is 1 boy's small lunch, 5 loaves of bread, and 2 fish. Picture the actual moment for a second. Instead of skimming past it the way you might skim past a familiar Sunday school illustration. Thousands of people sitting in groups on the grass, hungry, watching 12 men walk out from Jesus, carrying baskets that, moments earlier, held almost nothing. No blinding flash. No dramatic gesture toward the sky. Just Jesus taking the bread, looking up to heaven, giving thanks, breaking it, and handing it to his disciples to distribute. And it does not run out. Basket after basket goes out into the crowd, and everyone eats until they are full. More than 5,000 people, fed from 5 loaves and 2 fish, and 12 baskets of leftover pieces are gathered up afterward. 12 baskets, 1 for each disciple to carry home, as if the abundance itself was a lesson meant to travel with them. The crowd's response afterward, recorded in John's Gospel, is almost unsettling. They try to force him to become their king by physical compulsion. Jesus slips away from them into the hills alone. He will not let the miracle be turned into the wrong kind of power grab. That same night, his disciples are back out on the water, straining against a headwind in the dark, when they see something walking toward them across the surface of the lake. They think it's a ghost and cry out in terror. Jesus calls back to them immediately. "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." He climbs into the boat, and the wind stops instantly. It is I. Two small words, but in the original language, they echo the divine name God gave Moses at the burning bush centuries earlier. I am. Whether every listener caught that echo in the moment or not, the gospel writer clearly wants you to. Here's what most people miss. Jesus doesn't only walk on water to prove he can defy gravity. He does it to answer, one more time, the same question the storm already raised. Who is this? And the answer keeps getting larger. The pattern keeps moving outward, past Israel's own borders, into territory nobody expected him to bother with. A Gentile woman from the region of Tyre, a Canaanite, an outsider by every category that mattered in that world, comes to him, begging him to heal her daughter, who is tormented by an unclean spirit. Jesus, testing the depth of her faith, says something that sounds harsh out of context. It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. She answers without missing a step, "Yes, Lord." Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Jesus, moved by her answer, tells her to go home. Her daughter is already healed, and she is. In that same Gentile region, a deaf man with a severe speech impediment is brought to him. Jesus takes him aside privately, puts his fingers in the man's ears, touches his tongue, looks up to heaven, sighs deeply, and says one Aramaic word, "Ephphatha," be opened. Immediately, the man can hear and speak plainly for what may have been the very first time in his life. Not long after, a crowd of 4,000 people, again in Gentile territory, has been with him for 3 days with nothing to eat. 7 loaves and a few small fish are all that can be found. Jesus gives thanks again, and again the food multiplies in the distribution, until all 4,000 are full, and 7 baskets of leftovers remain. Notice something here nobody points out enough. The feeding of the 4,000 happens in Gentile land, mirroring the feeding of the 5,000 in Jewish land. The same provision, offered twice, to 2 different peoples. The pattern is not accidental. It's a message. This table is bigger than one nation. At Bethsaida, a blind man is brought to Jesus, and something happens that is unique among every miracle in this entire list. It takes 2 attempts. Jesus spits on the man's eyes, lays hands on him, and asks if he can see anything. The man looks up and says, "I see people, but they look like trees, walking." Jesus lays hands on his eyes a second time, and this time his sight is completely restored, and he sees everything clearly. Why would the only 2-stage miracle in the entire gospel record happen here, in this exact spot, right before the disciples themselves are asked the most important question of the whole story? Who do you say that I am? Peter answers with startling clarity, "You are the Christ." A partial sight healing, positioned right next to a moment of partial dawning spiritual clarity. That is not coincidence. That is craft. Soon after, on a mountain, Jesus' appearance is transformed in front of 3 of his disciples, his face shining, his clothes becoming dazzling white, and Moses and Elijah appear beside him. A voice from heaven says, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." When they come down from the mountain, they walk straight into a father in agony. His son has convulsions and has been thrown into fire and water repeatedly by a spirit the disciples couldn't cast out. "If you can do anything," the father says, "have compassion on us and help us." Jesus repeats his own words back to him, "If you can, everything is possible for the one who believes." And the father cries out one of the most honest sentences in the entire Bible, "I believe. Help my unbelief." Jesus casts the spirit out, and the boy is healed. Here's the part nobody tells you about that sentence. It isn't a contradiction. It's exactly how real faith usually sounds, not certainty without struggle, but belief spoken out loud in the same breath as its own doubt. A smaller miracle follows soon after Peter is told to catch a fish, and inside its mouth he will find a coin, exactly enough to pay both their temple tax. It's a strange, almost domestic little sign, tucked between much larger ones. But it says something quiet and important. The same power that stilled oceans and multiplied bread also cares about a tax bill. Then comes a sign so carefully told, in such detail, that an entire chapter of John's Gospel is devoted to just this one story. A man born blind from birth, never once in his life having seen light, is noticed by the disciples, who ask Jesus whose sin caused it, his own or his parents'. Jesus tells them neither this happened so that the work of God could be shown in him. He spits on the ground, makes mud, spreads it on the man's eyes, and tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. The man goes, washes, and for the first time in his entire life, sees. What follows is not celebration. It's interrogation. The religious authorities drag the man in front of them, question his parents, question him again, accuse Jesus of being a sinner because the healing happened on the Sabbath. The healed man, with nothing but plain honesty, gives them an answer that is echoed for 2,000 years. Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, I was blind, and now I see. For refusing to recant that simple sentence, they throw him out of the synagogue, entirely cut off from his community, his faith, and his family in one motion. This is not a story about a number. This is not a story about a miracle for its own sake. This is not a story about ancient medicine. This is a story about the exact moment the religious establishment's suspicion crystallized into outright rejection, and the man at the center of that rejection had done nothing except finally be able to see. The stakes have never been higher, and they are about to go higher still. There's more happening in this stretch than time allows us to walk through in full scene-by-scene detail, but each one matters, so let's move through them in order, and pay attention to who each one happens to. A woman in the synagogue has been bent double for 18 years, not able to straighten her back, not able to look anyone in the eye without twisting her whole body to do it. Jesus sees her, calls her forward, and heals her on the Sabbath, calling her a daughter of Abraham, worth freeing even on the holiest day of the week. The synagogue leader is indignant that healing happened on the Sabbath at all. You can hear, in his objection, the same suspicion that has followed every sign since the paralyzed man's forgiven sins. Helping her was never really the argument. Who had the right to decide the rules didn't matter that day that was? At a Pharisee's own dinner table, where Jesus is being watched closely to see if he'll slip up, a man suffering from dropsy, his body swollen with trapped fluid, is placed right in front of him, almost like bait. Jesus heals him anyway, in front of the very people hoping to catch him doing it. And on the road to Jerusalem, 10 men with leprosy call out to him from a distance, kept back by the same law that once kept the leper from the earlier story at arm's length from everyone he loved. Jesus tells them simply to go show themselves to the priests, the required step before a healed leper could be declared clean and allowed home. They go, and on the way, all 10 are healed. Only one of them turns back. A Samaritan, an outsider, even among outsiders, the kind of man the other 9 might not have sat down to eat with a week earlier, falls at Jesus' feet, loudly thanking God. Jesus asks the question that should sit with you longer than it usually does. Where are the other 9? You already know what it feels like to receive something good and simply move on with your day without turning back to say thank you for it. That's not a flaw unique to 9 ungrateful men in an old story. It's remarkably ordinary, which is exactly why the one who did turn back stands out at all. Every one of these 3, small as they may seem beside the larger signs surrounding them, is doing the same work. Compassion, extended to exactly the people society had already decided to walk past. And now we come to the sign that changes everything that comes after it. In the village of Bethany, a man named Lazarus, brother to 2 sisters named Martha and Mary, close personal friends of Jesus, falls seriously ill. The sisters send an urgent message. Lord, the one you love is sick. And Jesus strangely does not rush. He stays where he is for 2 more days before finally starting toward Bethany. By the time he arrives, Lazarus has already been dead and in the tomb for 4 days. In that culture, 4 days mattered specifically. There was a belief that the spirit lingered near the body for 3 days after death, but by the 4th day, it was gone for good. 4 days meant, beyond any possible doubt, that this man was not sleeping. He was dead and decomposing and finished. Martha meets Jesus on the road outside the village, her grief mixed with something close to accusation. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus tells her, "Your brother will rise again." She assumes he means the distant resurrection. At the end of all things, the kind of comfort every grieving person has heard 100 times before. Jesus tells her something far more immediate. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." Then Mary comes out to him too, weeping, saying the same words her sister said. And here's the moment. Out of 30-some recorded miracles, out of every single sign in this entire list, where the Bible gives us the shortest verse in the whole book, only 2 words, and they carry more weight than paragraphs could. Jesus wept. Think about what that means. The man who commands wind and sea, the man whose voice raised a widow's son and a synagogue leader's daughter, the man who knew, standing at that very grave, that he was about to reverse this death completely, that man still wept. Grief and power were not opposites in him. They stood in the same body, at the same moment, in front of the same tomb. You know this feeling, even if you've never stood at a grave exactly like this one. You know what it is to wait for news that might break you, a phone ringing too late at night, a hallway outside a hospital room, the specific silence right before someone tells you something you cannot undo. That waiting, that helplessness, is what Martha and Mary had been carrying for 4 days. And Jesus walked directly into the middle of it and did not rush past their tears to get to the miracle. He tells them to roll the stone away. Martha, practical to the end, warns him there will be a smell. 4 days is 4 days. Jesus asks her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" They roll the stone away. He looks up, prays aloud so the crowd will hear and believe, and then calls out in a loud voice 3 words that are almost unbearably simple for what they accomplish. "Lazarus, come out!" And the dead man walks out of the tomb, still bound in his grave clothes, strips of cloth wrapped around his hands and feet and face, exactly as he was buried 4 days earlier. Jesus tells the stunned crowd, "Unbind him and let him go." This is the moment. This is where everything we planted at the very beginning of this video finally resolves. Remember the wedding at Cana? Remember, "My hour has not yet come." Remember the strange thing Jesus said just after that when he told the religious leaders, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And how John's gospel quietly explains he was talking about his own body, his own death, his own resurrection, years before it happened. Lazarus rising from a 4-day-old tomb is the loudest possible preview of what is coming for Jesus himself. And it is also, according to the gospel record, the final straw. The religious authorities, hearing that Jesus had raised a dead man in broad daylight in front of witnesses, stop debating whether to move against him and start planning exactly how. From here, the road bends unmistakably toward Jerusalem and toward the cross. But before it gets there, 2 final signs remain quieter than Lazarus, but not smaller in meaning. On the road out of Jericho, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus sits by the roadside, and when he hears that Jesus is passing, he starts shouting over the crowd, trying to silence him, "Son of David, have mercy on me!" Jesus stops, calls him over, asks him plainly, "What do you want me to do for you?" Bartimaeus says, "Let me see again." Jesus tells him his faith has healed him, and immediately his sight returns, and he follows Jesus down the road toward the very city where Jesus is about to die. One more sign happens in these final days, and it looks nothing like the others, because for once, nothing is healed. Walking toward Jerusalem, Jesus sees a fig tree covered in leaves but no fruit, and he says, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." The next morning, the disciples pass the same tree and find it withered from the roots up. This is the only miracle on this entire list that is not an act of mercy. It's a warning, acted out in front of the very city that is about to reject him. A warning that looking alive on the outside means nothing if there's no fruit underneath. And then, on the night Jesus is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, the very night his enemies finally close in, one of his own disciples draws a sword and cuts off the ear of a servant of the high priest, a man named Malchus. And Jesus, in the middle of his own arrest, in the last hour of freedom he will ever have on earth, reaches out and heals the ear of the man who came to seize him. Think about the placement of that miracle. Every other sign in this list was performed for someone who came looking for help, or someone Jesus loved. This last one, his very last healing before the cross, was performed for an enemy, at the exact moment that enemy was actively arresting him. Mercy, offered without condition, right up until the final second before the door closes. He is crucified. He dies. He is buried in a borrowed tomb, and a stone is rolled across the entrance, and Roman soldiers are posted to guard it, a detail confirmed even outside the Bible. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing decades later with no interest at all in defending Christianity, recorded plainly that a man called Christus was executed under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. This is not a legend invented generations later. This is a documented execution of a documented man, recorded by people who had every reason not to care. And on the third day, precisely as he had told them, all the way back at that wedding in Cana, all the way back at that temple in Jerusalem, when he said his hour had not yet come, and that he would raise a destroyed temple in 3 days, the tomb is found empty. His hour had come. This is the final sign. Not water into wine, not 5 loaves feeding thousands, not even Lazarus walking out of a 4-day grave. All of those were previews. This is the sign every other sign in this entire list was quietly pointing toward the whole time. And even after the resurrection, one more small, tender detail remains. Some of the disciples go back to fishing, back on the same lake where this whole story of following him began, and a figure on the shore calls out to them to cast their net on the other side of the boat. They do, and the net comes up so full they can barely haul it in. John, recognizing the pattern before anyone else does, turns to Peter and says simply, "It is the Lord." 153 fish, and the net does not tear. It is the same miracle he performed the very first day he called Peter to follow him, the exact same sign, offered again, after death, after resurrection, as if to say, without a single wasted word, I am still who I was. I am still the one who fills empty nets, and empty jars, and empty tombs. So here is what this pattern actually shows you. Once you've walked through it, start to finish, instead of scattered across a lifetime of half-remembered Sunday mornings. The first thing to take from this is a simple truth. These signs were never random. From a wedding in Cana to an empty tomb outside Jerusalem, they follow a deliberate order, small to large, private to public, personal healing to authority over death itself, building one continuous argument for exactly who was standing in the middle of every single one of them. The second thing to take from this is more personal. Every single miracle in this list happened to someone who was, in some real way, stuck in sickness, stuck in shame, stuck in grief, stuck outside the community, stuck in a tomb. Not one of them happened to someone who had it all figured out. If you are waiting for your own kind of Cana moment, your own empty jar, your own 4-day grave, you are exactly the kind of person these signs were written for. And the third thing, the one I want you to sit with longest, is this. Jesus wept at a tomb he was about to empty. He knew, standing right there, that in a matter of minutes, Lazarus would be walking out alive. And he wept anyway. Whatever you are carrying right now that feels sealed shut, whatever grave you are standing outside of tonight, you are not asked to pretend it doesn't hurt while you wait for the stone to move. He didn't. Out of every miracle we walked through tonight, the wine, the storm, the loaves, the blind eyes, the 4-day grave, the healed ear of an enemy, at his own arrest, which one hit you the hardest? Tell me which one below, and why. I read every single comment. For 2,000 years, people have called these events miracles, as if the word itself explains them. It doesn't. A miracle only means something because of who performs it and why. Every single one you just heard was a sign, in order.